One of the most underused edges in carp fishing, I believe, is Arma Mesh. I'm a victim of not using it enough, and I'm sure plenty of you are as well, but it can give you a serious advantage over other anglers on your lake because it allows you to use baits that simply nobody else will be. In this video, I'm going to give you a few tips and ideas about how to get the best from Arma Mesh. Okay, so first up, what actually is Arma Mesh? Well, it may look like it's PVA, but it is 100% not. Obviously, it comes in a tube similar to PVA mesh, but it's actually a nylon mesh. This is the fine version, and this one's perfect for your alternative hook baits. And then we do a heavy version as well, and that's the one that you want to be using for protecting your hook baits from nuisance species, crayfish, that type of thing. But this is the thin one, and as you can see, it's a very finely woven mesh. Looks like PVA, but it will not dissolve. So my first hook bait tip would be to try matching your spod mix. Now, quite often you might match your spod mix by using a piece of plastic sweet corn, a piece of fake maize, or perhaps a pop-up that matches the colour of what's in your mix. So if you're using sweet corn, you might use a yellow pop-up. However, none of those things is actually using the real thing, and unless you're fishing very, very close in or right in the margins, presenting sweet corn on the hair is nigh on impossible, let alone presenting things like hemp or barley, wheat, that sort of thing, all those little bits and bobs that could be in your spod mix. Now, I'm a very simple person, and I like to keep my spod mixes simple, and often I'm using just sweet corn. So that's what I'm going to put into this first one, and it's literally, I'll probably put 5 grains of corn down into the tube. And like I said, you can do this with hemp, you can do it with your party mix, you can do it with a combination, maybe a bit of sweet corn and some crushed boilie, something like that, anything to match your spod mix perfectly. So I've just pushed it through, used the plunger exactly how you would do with PVA, and that's the great thing about this, is if you've used PVA, you can 100% use this. So I've just pushed it out there, made it into a nice little ball. I'm going to twist that really, really tightly, and then making sure that I'm holding everything nice and tight. Do an overhand knot there, and then a second one, so you're ready for your next hook bait. Now, using the scissors, I'm trimming off the tag ends very, very close to the knot, so there's not any excess. And that is a sweet corn hook bait that you can cast to the horizon, and that carp are just going to accept absolutely readily with no hesitation, like they might do if they're potentially picking up a piece of plastic or a pop-up, that type of thing. So the great thing with Arma Mesh is you can almost be certain that you'll be using a hook bait that will be different to anybody else on the lake, whether that be matching your spod mix like we've just talked about, or perhaps using a completely out there hook bait like mussels, cockles. You can use prawns with it, and I really like to use cat meat, just straight out the tin, 2 or 3 cubes of that down the tube of Arma Mesh into a little ball of a hook bait, and that is kicking off loads and loads of attraction. And yeah, in the past I've used quite a lot of cat meat in my spod mixes and that type of thing, and yeah, having a cat meat hook bait really has given me extra bites when I think other people have been struggling on more conventional methods. However, I think my #1 hook bait, and I think the biggest edge that you can have when using Arma Mesh, is using it for paste. Now, whether that's boilie paste or what I prefer to use, which is pellet paste, it just gives you that hook bait that is oozing attraction. And yeah, you can wrap your boilies in paste and you've got attraction around, but this is actually now your hook bait. Once that all breaks down, when you're not using Arma Mesh, little fish can just peck it away and then the attraction is gone. However, in the Arma Mesh, it can't get attacked by small fish, and it is as attractive a hook bait, I believe, that you can make. So this is my paste. It's literally just salmon microfeed that's been scalded with a little bit of water and then molded into a ball of paste. And to be honest, that's probably more than what I'd actually need. That's a tiny amount. That's probably 3 handfuls of crumb that's made that ball of paste. But remember, you're only really using them as hook baits, and that's going to be more than enough for a session. So again, with this, just take a little pinch of it off, mold it into a sort of sausage first so that it can fit down the tube. So I've just molded it into a little cylinder there, and then again it just pops down the tube. Compress it at the bottom and then push it out with the plunger. And as you can see already from that, all the mesh just cuts into the paste and completely disappears. The fish aren't going to know that there's any mesh there or anything, and yeah, that's going to be kicking off attraction but not breaking down like it would do if it wasn't encapsulated in that mesh. So again, I've just done the 2 little knots, trimming off the tags. And to me, with a bag of pellets or over a few boilies and a scattering of pellets, that is a awesome hook bait, and one that you can pretty much guarantee nobody else on your venue is using. So we talked about using Arma Mesh to match your hook bait to your spod mix, and of course using it for alternative baits, but you can also use it for more standard baits and just making them a bit more impervious and making sure that when you wind in, your hook bait's still on. Particularly when using pop-ups that you've rolled yourself, cork balls, and I don't know, for me, the pop-ups that I tend to roll myself, they always seem to be a little bit more soft than the ones that you buy straight out of the shop. So by using the Arma Mesh, you know that you've got a little bit of extra life out of them. And of course, if there are crayfish and nuisance species, perhaps birds relentlessly diving on your hook baits, you know that if you've got your hook bait wrapped in Arma Mesh, that it's still going to be on no matter how long you leave it out there for. Whereas when you get picked up by birds and things like that, if you haven't got Arma Mesh on and you are using a soft hook bait, it's always going to be niggling in the back of your mind whether that hook bait is still on or not. So you can see here I've got a normal hinge stiff rig pop-up rig, and I've got that hook bait wrapped in Arma Mesh, and you can see I've done it slightly different to how I did with the other hook baits, mainly because it just keeps it a little bit more subtle. You don't have the knots poking out at either end. And yeah, how I achieve that is basically by reversing the process. So here's my tube of Arma Mesh. So I've got my pop-ups here, my yellow homemade Carp Freaks pop-ups that I am badgering Mark to bring out. And these are softer than your normal pop-ups, especially the ones from 𝘃𝗵𝗶𝗀. These are a lot softer, so they do benefit, especially if I'm doing a longer session, from the Arma Mesh. So rather than putting it in the wide end of the tube, we're putting it in the narrow end of the tube, so on top of the knot, and that keeps the knot inside out effectively. So pushed it all the way through there, get the tube out the way, or the plunger out the way, and then I'm just going to pull that in, or sort of push it in as tight as possible, like so. And then rather than tying off like you would do with PVA, I'll find my scissors and just snip off sort of quite a way away from the pop-up, and what that's going to give me is the opportunity to cut down the middle of that strand and create 2 strands like so. So we've got 2 strands there, and with those 2 strands I'm just going to do 2 overhand knots and just pull them down really, really tight, and that creates a much smaller, neater, tidier fixing than doing it the other way. The other way I think is fine for sort of pastes and cat meat and that sort of thing, because the bait swells up in the water anyway, but with the pop-ups I just think it's a bit neater this way. So I'm just trimming off the tag ends, and then I'm gonna blob with a lighter like so. And there you've got a really nice, neat hook bait there. And then if you put that on with bait floss the normal way and blob it with a lighter, that's not going anywhere. That's staying on for 24, 48 hours, no problems, no matter how many birds try and pick you up, etc. So rig-wise, when using Arma Mesh, you probably do have to be a little bit more selective and precise with the rigs that you choose. You can't just use your normal standard rig. For pop-ups, yes, absolutely, you can use your favourite pop-up rig if you're meshing up those hook baits. But when using bottom baits like pace and cat meat, luncheon meat, mussels, anything like that, it's important that you use a rig that's going to make sure that the hook bait doesn't come in contact with the hook point. And what I mean by that is effectively it becomes caught on the mesh like that. You can see if that happens when you cast out, when the rig's on the bottom, when it's getting knocked about by fish feeding in the area, that's you done. You're not getting a bite on that. Never in a million years are you hooking a fish. So it's important that when you tie your rig, that you've got a stiff hair so that the hook bait doesn't have a chance of getting around that hook point. With this stiff fluorocarbon hair that I've got here, that's never going to happen. So, and this is how I tie this rig. So I use 20-pound Illusion fluorocarbon, which is 0.40. It's not mega stiff, not like a sort of bristle filament, but it's stiff enough to kick that hook link away. So I'm just going to cut off probably about 14 inches there. And the first thing to do is make your loop for your hook bait. So small loop. I always tend to use a baiting needle to help me out. And just trim off the tag. Now is the point when I put on my hook bait. And another thing that is very important is to use a gate latch baiting needle. If you don't use one of these, Arma Mesh can be an absolute nightmare because all of the little mesh strands get caught on the needle. So you need that gate latch just to close it up like so, and then that's never catching on the mesh. So I just need a bait stop. So next, just going to take a small piece of hook silicone. This is purely just to trap the hair. Just trim off a bit of that. Slide it down a hook link. And then get my hook. I use the Stiff Rig beak point hooks mainly for the outturned eye. I just prefer the way that the line exits, the way the fluorocarbon exits on an outturned eye when doing a knotless knot. So push the line through the back of the eye, and then I'm just positioning a piece of silicone in line with the barb, and then just making sure that that is not going to come into contact with the point of the hook. And as long as it's not too long, I've probably got 5mm gap from the back of the hook, that's going to be absolutely fine. Then I'm going to finish off with a simple knotless knot, 7 turns down, and just do 2 turns back up, fill with fluorocarbon. That sort of just secures it in place a little bit better. Through the back of the eye again, and that's it tied. It just needs a figure of 8 loop knot in the end so I can attach it to my quick change swivel. It is very important to always wet your knots down with fluorocarbon. And then just to make sure the hook link gets nice and straight, just pull it between the 2 puller tools. Oh. Trim off the tag, and that is the rig finished. Really, really simple, but very, very effective, especially when using Arma Mesh hook baits.